Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 12th. I don't know, that sounded like one of those old-timey horse racing announcers all of a sudden. It's April 12th, and they're out of the gate, and here they come around the first bend, and it's a little too early because they just got out of the gate, and, I don't know anything about horse racing. Okay, well, anyway, the point is, it is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. That's the important point here, just to make sure that you're not listening to a rerun, unless, of course, you are listening to a rerun, in which case, Happy Easter 2024. Okay, with that taken care of, I guess that's out of the way. We can now move on to the rest of the show. Although, will we ever move on to the rest of the show? Greg Dworkin will not be with us this Wednesday. He has some maintenance appointment. I mean, self-maintenance, just getting a little dental checkup, No HIPAA secrets here. Just wanted to let you know everything's okay. Nothing to worry about. Routine stuff. I mean, I don't know. Could be a dental emergency. He didn't tell me that. He just said he was going to the dentist. That seems pretty benign. I think everything's going to be okay. We have lots of stories to share. Normally, I would ramble for a little while trying to find my footing, and then he would come swooping in, and we'd hear the ding-dong noise from Skype, and then we'd be back to the news. But if I start now, just wandering down the lane, no one is here to rescue me or turn me around at this point. So, we'll just segue straight into the news, shall we? There's a lot. And this is also a good opportunity to try and maybe fill in some stuff that I would ordinarily save for Fridays, but Fridays are getting backed up. So I don't know. We'll see which direction the show takes today. Why don't we try a blind stab at the last thing I saw before going on the air, which was, I don't know, a raw story, which I haven't had the chance to actually look over and see whether it's truly interesting. But just as an experiment, we'll all read it together and find out whether it was worth our time, and then discuss it afterwards. Perhaps the big headline from Raw Stories: Matthew Chapman, not this morning, but I guess last night, fired Fox producer. There are lots of them turning up in these Dominion lawsuits, etc. Network has secret tapes of Rudy Giuliani. Now, pretty much any tape of Rudy Giuliani is bound to be revealing and entertaining, and not good for him. It's really pretty rare that you can record him and he does well. But let's see what this one is about. This fired Fox producer, there are several, is Abby Grossberg, the former Tucker Carlson producer who was fired by Fox News. She is now alleging that the network has secret tapes of Rudy Giuliani admitting that there is no proof of the 2020 presidential election being stolen, reported the Daily Beast on Tuesday. Sure, I could be reading you the Daily Beast, but who does a better job of getting the news to me via social media? Raw Story does. So, Grossberg, who is suing the conservative network for harassment and a toxic work environment, that doesn't even grow out of the Dominion suit, claims that the behind-the-scenes conversations with Giuliani, former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, and Trump campaign officials featured them admitting they had no evidence to support their Dominion election fraud lies, reported Justin Baragona. Well, that is interesting. I guess it doesn't surprise me that much that Rudy Giuliani might have been aware of that. I don't know. I guess I would have said it's a coin toss on Sidney Powell. She might not actually realize that she has no evidence, even though she was the more accomplished lawyer of the two, I think. Or at least of late. Anyway, I mean, Rudy did have a fairly substantive and significant legal career before becoming mayor of New York, so I don't know. But people's abilities decline. Anyway, where were we with this one? Right, so they admit that they had no evidence. Additionally, she says, this is to say, Grossberg says, an advisor of former President Donald Trump pointed out the importance of January 6th, weeks before the Capitol attacks, noting that the advisor said that there were, quote, no issues with voting machines, and that January 6th was now the backstop for determining the election. So prior indication that, one, that they knew that there was no real reason to stop the certification, and two, that they had already targeted January 6th for something extraordinary. Now, let's see. Once a senior booking producer for pro-Trump Fox News host Maria Bartiromo, before moving to Carlson's show, Grossberg filed 2 lawsuits against Fox News last month, alleging that the network sought to make her and Bartiromo scapegoats in the bombshell lawsuit, all while deflecting blame from Fox executives, the report continued. So there is a Dominion case tie-in. Okay. I figured there really, I didn't know whether I was just making a mistake in conflating the two or what, but there is in fact some connection, and I guess her suit arises from out of Fox's efforts to deflect blame in the Dominion case. Fox News said in a statement to Raw Story, Fox has complied with its discovery obligations in the Dominion case. By the way, that turns out not to be true. And I don't know whether that's going to be addressed in this article or not. But if not, perhaps we can turn around and find some... I don't know if I put the story aside because it's relatively minor in the scheme of things, even though it involved the judge yelling at the attorneys for Fox in this Dominion case in ways that should embarrass them and that they should... Well, you should ordinarily spend your legal career fearing might happen to him. Please, I'll do anything to avoid having this happen. And then it has happened to them. Anyway, rough day today. All right. One of the core claims in Grossberg's suit is that Fox lawyers tried to advise her to mislead investigators in a Dominion deposition, withholding information by saying she didn't recall things that she in fact did. I always wondered about that. I didn't really wonder. We all knew that they were doing that, and that lots of people do that in lots of cases. It's bad. It shouldn't happen, but people do lie all the time for their own advantage. She also has claimed that the culture behind the scenes at Fox News is flagrantly misogynistic and anti-Semitic, with Carlson's staff making jokes about Jews openly, and some employees asking each other if they'd prefer to have sex with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, okay, or her Republican opponent, Tudor Dixon. Okay, I mean, as dumb as that is, and as horrific as it is for workplace behavior, that's, I don't know, that's actually to be expected, I think, of someone as horrific and horrible and as bad a work colleague as you could ever hope for in Tucker Carlson. I mean, that's the culture around him, is frat house, locker room crap, even though I'm sure he never stepped in a locker room in his life, unless it was for squash, perhaps. Anyway, yeah, they probably would be talking about that. And, well, it's wrong. Fox News initially tried to quash Grossberg's allegations, alleging they violated attorney-client privilege, but later backed off this stance. I guess they were trying to say that, that's interesting. As we were paying for her legal representation all this time, all the things that she may have discussed with her lawyer would be subject to attorney-client privilege. And I guess she finally said, I'm getting my own lawyer and I'm suing you. You can't prevent me from filing suit against you because you once provided me legal representation. Doesn't really work that way, and I guess that's why they dropped it. Okay, well, that's the end of that one. Now, I'm pretty sure I did not pocket this other story, I don't know. There's so many other things happening that it just, I don't know. I guess I couldn't get it to rise to that level, but now that we've kind of gone there, let's see. Who's got coverage of this? I wonder if it's over perhaps at Daily Kos. Although I would think that Time would have pushed this off the front page by now. And they may never have covered it front page. But what was happening, as I recall, I'll see as I scan around and see if there's a story I can read to you to share it that way. I guess not. Although maybe I'll just go over to the Google News page and find it. But there was, relatively minor development, I think, in the Dominion suits, in which the lawyers for Fox in the Dominion suit were apparently finally forced to admit through, I think, an error of their own that, here we are, NPR, judge lectures Fox attorneys over dual roles for Rupert Murdoch. I guess for the balance of time that this suit has been going on, and probably even longer, and in other suits, I guess the Fox litigation approach has always been, they've sort of bifurcated the company. There's Fox News, and then there's like sort of Fox Corporation that owns Fox News and other things, and a Fox News network and a Fox News channel and Fox stations that are not necessarily affiliated, and Fox Business News, all the different business verticals. And they were trying to claim, and the article will straighten out which way this worked, but trying to claim that Rupert Murdoch wasn't an officer or director of all of these companies. He was director of one or the other, but wasn't on the board of all of them, such that every layer of responsibility in this Dominion lawsuit fell in part on decisions that Rupert Murdoch was making. But apparently they, accidentally slipped up or whatever, but at some point finally admitted, he actually is an executive in both layers of the company, the ownership group and the Fox News channel group as well. And the judge kind of had to admonish them, as the Dominion lawyers were pointing out, we can't trust these guys with anything. We made specific requests in discovery that were denied because they said, Rupert Murdoch doesn't have an individual role at this level of this company, and so therefore we shouldn't have to produce emails from him or about him or involving him because he doesn't have an official role at this level. And the judge, I guess, must have gone along with them on that and declined to force them to disclose those things and to produce those things. And now they're already about at trial stage. And we find out, we were lying about that the whole time. Discovery should have looked entirely different. And here we are about to go to trial. So let's see. Carl Baker's entry at NPR. Judge lectures Fox attorneys over dual roles for Rupert Murdoch. A Delaware judge on Tuesday lectured attorneys defending Fox News in a $1.6 billion, you knew how much that was, right? $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit after they revealed that Rupert Murdoch is not only the chairman at Fox Corp, the overall umbrella group, but also a corporate officer at its subsidiary, Fox News. Now, again, word on the street always was that was the case. We all believed that that's exactly how Fox was structured. But I guess you could see the possibility that if the old man is the chairman of the umbrella ownership group, he can still wield plenty of influence. Maybe it's possible that he's not also on the board at Fox News. But clearly, Rupert Murdoch picks up the phone. Everybody at Fox News will jump. He's the owner of the umbrella group. But now it turns out that he's a director there too, and I guess you'll see why that matters. Delaware Superior Court Judge Eric M. Davis said Fox lawyers previously had, quote, represented to him, the judge, more than once that Murdoch was not an officer for the subsidiary cable network. Such information could have led him to make different rulings earlier on in the case, he said. I'm not very happy right now, Davis said in his often understated manner. Understated, not like Matthew Kaczmarek, who's always flapping his gums about various things. The statement was one of a flurry of eye-opening exchanges between Davis and attorneys at the Tuesday hearing, during which the court set rules for what is certain to be a landmark defamation trial scheduled for later this month. It was also that Fox has pushed back against, or since anyway. Kind of screwed up that sentence, but you get the idea, I think. In a statement released Tuesday evening, a spokesperson for the network said, Rupert Murdoch has been listed as executive chairman of Fox News in our SEC filings since 2019, and this filing was referenced by Dominion's own attorney during his deposition. Okay, so Fox says, well, we already told you that, but I think the court has a different view of it, and for the moment, it will be the court's view that's important here. A Fox proxy statement, yes, a Fox proxy, filed in 2020, does indeed list Murdoch as serving as the, quote, executive chairman of Fox News Network, LLC, whatever executive chairman might mean. Nevertheless, the I'm thinking about that, like CEO is a chief executive officer, executive is in there. Chairman of the board is usually a different position. Executive chairman, I don't know. I'm trying to think about what sort of hybrid position this might be. Anyway, nevertheless, the judge's comments Tuesday marked the second time in weeks that questions arose about the credibility of Fox attorneys. That's really not good for you. Last month, former Fox producer Abby Grossberg, filed a lawsuit against the network alleging those attorneys coerced, intimidated, and misinformed her before she sat for questioning by a Dominion attorney in September. Fox has said Grossberg's allegations in connection with the Dominion cases are baseless, but it has come up before. Voting machine software company Dominion Voting Systems is, of course, suing Fox and its parent Fox Corp on claims that the network repeatedly aired baseless statements about voter fraud during the wake of the 2020 presidential election. Those included lies about Dominion's voting software switching votes from Trump to Biden, statements that were also pushed by Trump, his inner circle, and his supporters. They often did so on Fox News. I probably could have eliminated that paragraph. For more than a year, Fox News has argued that its parent company, Fox Corporation, and the chairman, Murdoch, had little to do with editorial decisions at the cable network. I guess that was the idea of trying to separate him from Fox News Corporation and just saying, well, he oversaw all sorts of Fox operations. He didn't have day-to-day control over what happened on the air on Fox News Network. As such, Fox attorneys had sought to keep any potential liability against the cable network separate from that against the parent company. They also resisted requests from Dominion during the early stages of the lawsuit for information about the Murdoch family because, as Fox argued, they were only affiliated with Fox Corporation. Dominion attorney Justin Nelson said on Tuesday. That was the Dominion attorney echoing the claims that had been made to them by Fox attorneys. As a result, Dominion's attorneys are, quote, missing a whole bunch of Rupert Murdoch documents that we otherwise would have been entitled to, Nelson claimed. Can you imagine this case with even more bombshells? Let's see if that can happen. Nelson's comments appeared to have prompted Davis to excoriate Fox attorneys and even pose questions about their credibility. I don't know why this is such a difficult thing, he said, referring to apparent confusion over the identities of Fox News' officers. In response, one Fox attorney called Murdoch's position with the network honorific and said the role had been disclosed during a previous deposition. But Davis was not pacified. He said an officer of a company cannot, quote, escape responsibility by saying they didn't have any tasks. Right. That's not going to fly in Delaware in particular, where they really know their business law. They kind of define it for the whole country. Beyond the questions of Rupert Murdoch's roles, Tuesday's hearing also featured a testy exchange between Davis and attorneys that touched on a key Fox defense that the network cannot be sued for defamation because it had a right to air newsworthy allegations made by people close to the President of the United States. Davis made clear his opinion that the cable network could be held liable for the billion-dollar claim, actually $1.6 billion claim, even though its hosts were often not those who uttered the defamatory statements. It is irrelevant whether the person making the false claim was a Fox employee or a Fox guest, Davis said, arguing that the key question is whether Fox, as a company, published the information maliciously. It's a publication issue, he said. It's not a who said it issue. Speaking to the remainder of Fox's argument, Davis warned attorneys to stay away from the word newsworthy in opening statements because he had previously ruled it is not a legal defense against defamation. Still, he said, he would allow Fox hosts testifying during trial to state whether they personally believed false claims against Dominion were newsworthy. That prompted the first instance of pushback from attorneys for Dominion on Tuesday, who argued that a jury would be prejudiced by such testimony from a Fox host. Davis shot back, arguing there is a distinction between what a Fox host believed to be newsworthy and what Fox lawyers argued could absolve the company from defamation. This is weedy, but it's good to know. Davis further stated Dominion would have an opportunity to effectively pick apart a Fox host's statement if they asserted under oath that election lies were newsworthy. In a response that neared a role play, Davis suggested various questions that Dominion attorneys could ask during a cross-examination, including why Fox hosts who believed election lies to be newsworthy didn't also air interviews with then-President-elect Joe Biden. I could have a lot of fun with this case, Davis said, imagining, I guess, how it would be if he were the Dominion lawyers. Later, during Tuesday's hearing, Dominion attorneys also pushed back against a previous decision from the court that barred them from introducing information at trial about the January 6th riots or about details of threats made against Dominion employees. Davis said the actions made by individuals with no relationship to Fox, or what he called third parties' looniness, could unfairly prejudice the jury against Fox. While jurors could hear about the mere existence of threats, Dominion attorneys could not discuss the fine details of them, the judge said. And I guess that's a reasonable compromise. But they will be able to, because they will need to. It will help, and I think, and not be unfairly prejudicial to tell everybody, well, here are the real world consequences of publishing these lies, is it drove people to sack the Capitol, to make threats against everybody under the sun, including Dominion employees, but also other people not herein represented in this suit. But okay, you can't read all the lurid details of the threats necessarily, or at least not all of them, or enter them all into the record. We'll see how it comes out in practice. But at least they'll be able to mention the fact that, yeah, it led to real-world consequences like actual threats being made against Dominion employees. And there's really no reason in the world why that could have or should have happened in a normal world but for that violence or that threatened violence being incited by Fox's publication of these lies. All right. In response, Dominion attorney Megan Meyer argued that it was Fox broadcasts that directly motivated individuals to make threats against employees at the voting machine company. She said Fox effectively yelled fire in a crowded theater, quoting, of course, the oft-cited limit to free speech, but Fox doesn't want to hear about the stampede that followed. Adding to the criticism, Nelson argued Dominion should be allowed to question Fox employees about the Capitol riots, as they are relevant to evidentiary issues, particularly why Fox chose to pivot its support away from Trump following the event. Davis, in response, again suggested a question that Dominion could ask in its place. He said Dominion could inquire why Fox executives chose to pull back support from Trump. If their answer brought up January 6th, Dominion could pursue the topic, the judge said. So I guess they won't. To cap the exchange, Davis stressed that he must strike a balance between giving attorneys leeway and ensuring jurors would rule only on the claims in the case and not the controversial issues that linger just beyond it. It is a tough line to hew to as a judge. I mean, the fallout of their publication of the lies is wide-ranging and well-known, and it'll be difficult to allow the proper amount of reference to it and no more than that. And, I think as long as he makes a reasonable effort at it, I doubt very much that it would be cause for, basis for any appeals or motions for mistrial at some later date. But anyway, just an interesting fact. getting a little weedy about the case, but it'll be good to get a little bit weedy so that we understand things as they develop when the trial begins. And newsworthy, despite the admonishment not to use the word newsworthy during, opening arguments, was it? Anyway, newsworthy for you to know that the judge is getting testy with the Fox lawyers and what they've been trying to do, and that they are under suspicion for being duplicitous with the court in multiple cases related to the Dominion lawsuit. That's something new. All right. Let's see. Other stories I wanted to share with you. I mentioned judicial temperament that Davis is exhibiting, but other judges are not. Well, anyway, you know what I'll do? Rather than read the whole piece, and there are a few things as torturous as reading an entire Ruth Marcus piece, quite honestly. I generally tend to agree with her, but sometimes she can be tedious. But when I don't agree with her, holy mackerel, what an annoyance. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I like the tactic of what she's doing. She's treating the topic of Judge Matthew, Kacsmaryk, with a label that he deserves, and I don't know whether everybody's going to pick up on it or not, but I like it's very bumper stickery. She had an opinion piece back on April 8th. The worst federal judge in America now has a name. And that name, of course, is Matthew Kacsmaryk, but of course the next name that appears in print is Ruth Marcus. And I'm sure she didn't mean that she was the worst judge in America. That's supposed to be the byline, you see. Anyway, she goes on to tell the story of Kacsmaryk, which I think we all know by now. But I bring up the piece mostly because I just loved what was in the headline, and that people, I guess we should make it our business to refer to Matthew Kacsmaryk as the worst federal judge in America. And she has her reasons for it, and none of them are wrong. I don't know. It doesn't really... It's a long piece that will confirm all your priors. You're welcome to read it. I'll certainly provide you with a link. I just wanted to walk away with that bumper sticker takeaway. Worst federal judge in America, Matthew Kacsmaryk.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. More news happening and more ideas for stories to discuss cropping up at every turn. We'll have to try and keep this under control. Let's see. Other things to share with you. Well, some of these are toots and tweets, and I have to open them up and figure out what they are before deciding whether or not they get a place in line here. All right. You know what? Here's something interesting. Did I park this one? I don't know, but I have a feeling that this might be what this thread suggested to me by Patrick Snyder might be all about. He said, here is an interesting thread, and well, if nothing else, it will lead me to discuss the story, even if it's not mentioned here. But the interesting mini thread here is from Irishy Girl, Irish Ree Girl, Irish Ree. I don't know what that. I don't know what it's supposed to mean, but not Irishy as in I'm sort of Irish, but Irishry. She's interested in the things that define people as Irish. Irishry, the practice of being Irish, I guess. Anyway, she has this to say on the Bird site. In Kentucky, it's the law. It's the law. Do you all have those commercials around you? We had these radio campaign for the longest time about how you had to call Miss Utility, whatever that might mean, Miss Utility before you dig to make sure that there aren't any buried utility lines where you're planning on building a project. And they used to say, before you dig, call Miss Utility. It's the law. Seems like it should be a national campaign because it should be the law everywhere. But then there are places like Kentucky where it's the law for what? For citizens to shower once a year. And I presume that means at minimum, and that's not the ceiling to the number of showers. In Kentucky, it's illegal for a woman to buy a hat without her husband's permission. I love these compilations of weird laws that used to be on the books or still are on the books, and they're technically still there. So I don't know. I guess they're enforceable. And it just, you wonder about the circumstances that would drive state legislators to say, we need to spend time on this one. I mean, it's not that hard to imagine where that comes from. It's just really hard to imagine, other legislators going along with it. Like, I don't know whether it was a legislator themselves who said, my wife buys too many hats and I need to put a stop to this. Or is it, I guess I'm just curious about whether it's that or whether it's I've received a communication from a constituent whose wife has bought too many hats and we really need to do something legal about it, as opposed to saying, why don't you sit down with your wife and talk about it? But I don't know. Anyway, somebody must have been pretty smelly. Now there's a law you got to shower once a year. Somebody's upset about hat purchases. I guess old Doc Graham has got mad about his wife Alicia buying too many hats, but then he's really responsible for buying a lot of those hats himself, isn't he? If you recall the story from Field of Dreams correctly. Anyway, what else is it illegal to do in Kentucky? It's illegal to marry the same person more than 3 times. Which again, I'm not certain why anybody would step into that situation. I mean, you might consider stepping into that situation intervention-wise. A friend of yours, this is a mistake. This is getting crazy. You look kind of weird and funny marrying anybody. Marrying different people more than 3 times is unusual. But in today's environment, who knows? Or maybe in the olden times when people were dying of smallpox and diphtheria and what have you, left and right, and you had to get married 4 times. But marrying the same person more than 3 times, that's even more unusual. Still, you say, does the state have a role in this? But, that's small government for you. Anyway, apparently somebody thought that was super important. Meanwhile, it was never important in Kentucky, like maybe you shouldn't marry one person 1 time if they're 16, for instance. No, that can be okay. Anyway, also in Kentucky, just by comparison, anyone can own a gun, even domestic abusers. There are no red flag laws, no background checks, no permit, no problem. That's priorities for you in Kentucky. Can't buy a hat without your husband's permission. But you can buy a gun and shoot your husband if he denies you permission to buy a hat. That's important. In Tennessee, it's illegal to drive while asleep. Well, that's usually self-enforcing. But, I mean, I could actually see why that's on the books, right? A guy causes an accident because he fell asleep at the wheel and apparently, I don't know, either they missed out on holding him liable for the crash in some way. Can you imagine? That must have been some trial. But you were asleep at the wheel. This is clearly your fault. I know, exactly. I was asleep. It's clearly not my fault. All right, then, that's true. We don't actually have a statute that says it's illegal to drive while you're asleep. I guess we're going to have to let you go. And ex post facto law prohibitions will protect you. Next guy that falls asleep at the wheel is really going to get it. But all right. Anyway, I mean, I think that was really just a failure of the Texas state court system to construct liability out of falling asleep while behind the wheel. And maybe it was just fine, and they did that, and they constructed it just fine, and some lawmaker thought, well, I'll just make sure that in case we have an incompetent judge later on, we have our bases covered. Well, what else have we got here? In Tennessee, it's illegal to catch a fish with a lasso. And, well, that's the fish lobby, obviously. They're getting tired of that happening. All right. Well, I don't know why. In Tennessee, it's illegal for frogs to croak, I imagine that's supposed to be, rather than croc, after 11 p.m., which I suppose means it's legal to kill them for croaking after 11 p.m. It's very rare that frogs will be aware of this. I don't know if there's any way to make them aware of this. I don't even think a frog would be mentally competent to stand trial, but then again, I'm not certain that these legislators were mentally competent to serve. In Tennessee, it's illegal to sell hollow logs. A very important prohibition. Now, on the other hand, in Tennessee, there is no state permit required for the possession of rifles, shotguns, or handguns. It is unlawful to possess a handgun for persons. What? I don't even know what that means. What? Are we sure about this? In Tennessee, no state permit requirement for the possession of rifles, shotguns, or handguns. It is unlawful to possess a handgun for persons. I'm not even certain what that's supposed to mean. But what it reminds me of is having seen yesterday, did I not put this one away? I thought maybe this too. There were a couple of stories that were like, wow, those are interesting facts, but just not necessarily, well, I thought at the time not necessarily worth discussing on the air, and yet here I am. Here we are. Yes, right. I saw this tweeted around yesterday, or perhaps tooted around, from Salon magazine. Gabriella Ferragini, I'm hoping is the pronunciation of her last name, mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, furious that Kentucky is going to auction off the AR-15 just used in the Louisville mass shooting the other day. Isn't that something? We always get angry about that every time there's a mass shooting with an AR-15 and some local politician or I've seen schools do it to say as a fundraiser, we're going to auction off an AR-15 right here in the same state or city where a massacre was just perpetrated with an AR-15. Of course, in every city, in every state, a massacre is perpetrated with an AR-15 just about every day, so it's difficult to avoid. But when that particular type of gun is in focus in this local area, it's usually considered in poor taste to auction off another of them within days of a mass killing in which one was used. What's worse is when you are auctioning off the actual gun used in the killing. And some of you might recognize immediately what's going on. Others of you will be baffled by this. But in some states, particularly these states where they're particularly pro-gun, there are, just as we have learned along the way, prohibitions at the state level because, big government, we hate big government and we want people to govern at the local level, where the state government will prohibit federal political subdivisions and municipalities and counties from adopting their own gun regulations according to what their own constituents want, and they have to adhere instead to the bare minimum as set by the state. And they are prohibiting localities from restricting gun ownership or possession in any way. Now, these places are so pro-gun that when a gun is used in a crime, if the gun was legally purchased, and there's nothing, quote unquote, illegal about the gun except for the murder that it was used for to commit, then you can't destroy the gun after you're done. Like, I guess if you need it for evidence at a trial, that would be one thing. You'll hold on to it for that long. When you've killed the perpetrator of the mass murder, presumably there will be no trial, although there will likely be civil liability later on. Anyway, you don't need the gun for evidence. And there's some question of what will the authorities then do with the gun? And the past practice was, well, why have additional dangerous weapons on the street? Let's destroy the gun. But pro-gun lobbyists in many states have said, well, no, I mean, that's a legal weapon and it could be, somebody else could now use it for good murder, right? So we want to put it back in circulation, and the authorities are prevented from either holding on to the gun or destroying it, and instead they have to auction it off. And so now you find yourself in the awkward situation of having a mass murder perpetrated just days ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and the authorities in Louisville about to have an auction where you can buy the very AR-15 that was just used to murder 5 citizens in a mass shooting here. And it's a little unseemly. And Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg agrees that it's unseemly. And on Tuesday, he decried a Kentucky law that allows the rifle used in Monday's mass shooting to be auctioned off. The shooting at Old National Bank on Monday killed 5 people and wounded 8 others. The Louisville Metro Police Department reported that the suspect legally purchased the AR-15 rifle. I mean, it's hard to illegally purchase an AR-15 these days. There's almost no laws standing in the way of it. Anyway, he legally, I don't even know who the shooter was, legally purchased the AR-15 rifle used in the shooting from a local gun dealership on April 4th. So there's your waiting period for you. April 4th, they bought the gun, and April 10th, they were a mass murderer. And they had to wait for Easter to be over and all that. Or maybe Passover. We don't know. Anyway, under current Kentucky law, the assault rifle that was used to murder 5 of our neighbors and shoot at rescuing police officers will one day be auctioned off. It might be that they have to wait a decent interval in order to do it, but I don't know. But the point is, it really never should be. And who wants to buy such a thing? And you have to wonder whether it's, a random person looking for a shopping deal on an AR-15, and you have to wonder about why that's so important to them. Or is it a true weirdo? I mean, is it, say, a billionaire who collects Nazi memorabilia who says, I want mass murder guns now as part of my collection? It's a little strange, and we really shouldn't be fostering this. Anyway, Greenberg, so under current Kentucky law, this will happen, Greenberg said during a Tuesday press conference at Louisville Metro Hall. Think about that. The murder weapon will be back on the streets one day under current Kentucky law. So much for tough on crime. But then the argument is the gun didn't commit the crime. It's innocent. It's an inanimate object. Greenberg said his administration has already directed police to remove the firing pin in confiscated guns before turning them over to the state. That's all the current law allows us to do, he added. That's not enough. It's time to change this law and let us destroy illegal guns and let us destroy guns that have been used to kill our friends and kill our neighbors. Representative Morgan McGarvey, a Democrat in Kentucky, also delivered an impassioned speech at the presser, arguing that legislators have not put the tools on the books to deal with someone who is an imminent danger to themselves or to others. We can do this, he continued. We can come together at the federal level to solve this problem, which is impacting all of us in a uniquely American way, and get universal background checks so that people who shouldn't have a gun can't buy one, that we are taking weapons of war off our streets, that we are helping people who are in crisis. That's not a political issue, McGarvey added, but it becomes one when Kentucky Republicans would rather ban books and pronouns than make Kentucky a sanctuary state for weapons. That is some backwards priorities, I think. Let's see. Greenberg has adamantly opposed the resale of firearms confiscated by law enforcement, vowing in 2022 that part of his plan to reduce crime entailed seeing that Louisville police ensure that firearms are inoperable before they go to auction. We're spending millions of taxpayer dollars to take illegal guns off the streets, to remove guns from the hands of criminals or people seeking to do harm, and then there's a process in place where these guns end up back on the streets in different people's hands, Greenberg said during a September 2022 interview. And while I appreciate the sentiment, again, right, the gun enthusiasts point out it's not the gun that did it. And in many cases, it seems like he's maybe confusing things a little bit. And I think guns that were not legally purchased before they were used in crimes end up getting destroyed. But guns that were legally purchased, the gun hasn't done anything wrong. It was just used in a murder. And maybe the next owner will, it's like adopting pit bulls. I guess people would say, well, it's really the owner that's at fault here. And there's nothing inherently dangerous about the gun or the pit bull. Maybe the next owner will pet the gun and take it out for walks frequently. Anyway, it's not a really great idea. But Greenberg narrowly survived the shooting himself, apparently, in February of 2022, when a candidate for Louisville's Metro Council opened fire. Wow, on the then mayoral candidate at his campaign headquarters. The gun allegedly used in the shooting was purchased at a pawn shop mere hours before that event took place. And guess what? They probably had to auction off that gun too, because it was legally purchased. How do you like that? That's some kind of story for you. And imagine, I guess he was already running for office when the shooting took place, but obviously he was probably thinking about campaigning on gun safety issues already, and then to survive a shooting, and then, of course, to be mayor, to preside over the city when an infamous mass murder takes place, and then the indignity of having to watch that gun be returned to the market. Just kind of extraordinary. All right. By the way, why not throw another, this is not where I thought I was going today, but it's always fun for me when the show is a little bit of a surprise for me as well, although it's not a total surprise since I'm the one who put these stories in pocket for myself. The Washington Post had an interesting story that's, I guess you could consider the culmination of a lot of discussion back in the gun fail days. It's always gun fail day, obviously, but and guns fail every day. But back when this was where I spent more of my energy than I did on the show, things have since changed. But something that came up from time to time in the gun fail annals, because there were occasional gun accidents. Well, there was always somebody telling me, well, there are no gun accidents. There's only gun, what did we say? Negligence, or malfeasance for that matter. And guns don't, and as gun enthusiasts love to say, guns don't fire themselves. These are people. Guns don't shoot people. People do. And just keep your finger off the trigger and know your safety rules. And then, of course, you'd still find that there were safety instructors accidentally shooting themselves and shooting others, and it's not all that easy. And when it's a handheld instant death machine, any little tiny mistakes, you can't hold me responsible for that. The consequences can be enormous because it's a death machine. That's what it's made for. And all I did was accidentally put my finger here instead of there, and now somebody's dead. But really all that happened was, come on, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my finger was supposed to be here, and instead it was an inch away over here. Are you really going to hang me over that? Well, somebody's dead. Well, it's not my fault, Well, it could have been a ladder. I could have had my hand over here and dropped it on their head. Anyway, through it all, there were always a few cases every once in a while, particularly when you had highly trained police officers, safety instructors, etc., who said, I know that we always say guns don't fire themselves, but I've just had an accident, and so I need you to know my gun fired by itself. And it's, you roll your eyes at that one. How are you supposed to swallow that? Well, there were an awful lot of those claims, and I noted in the background, well, I can believe that there could be defective weapons out there. And, technically gun enthusiasts will always, the really weedy ones will point and say, well, I'm saying a properly functioning gun won't fire by itself, but they could have an improperly functioning gun. And in which case that's somebody else's fault, not yours, maybe not the manufacturers, because the manufacturers also make all these awesome good guns and we don't want them to be in trouble. So I don't know. It's a goat's fault. We'll take that goat outside of the city limits and kill it there, and then that will all make sense. Anyway, Washington Post has this story from yesterday. Popular handgun fires without anyone pulling the trigger, victims say. And they're not talking about one particular popular pistol that happens to be walking around. It's a very famous pistol, and he fired. It's, the whole line, right? There's something wrong. There's a manufacturing defect, they claim, in the SIG Sauer P320 pistols. And I still never really figured out whether I'm saying the name of the company right, but it's a very popular brand of handgun. And as a result of its popularity and its defect, the subheader tells us that at least 80 people from police, including police officers, as it turns out, allege they were shot by their SIG Sauer P320 pistols. Some have lost work and live in pain after serious injuries. Champ Barton and Tom Jackman wrote the piece. It's a very interesting subject. Interesting also that it has some of our favorite construction here, or reminds us of our favorite construction. People who have lost work and live in pain after serious injuries, usually people who in the initial reports of the stories, and everybody trying to not blame the gun, very frequently local reporters will say they are expected to make a full recovery, by which they mean the handheld instant death machine didn't actually succeed in killing them immediately. And so therefore they're expected to make a full recovery, or sometimes they leave out the full. They're expected to make a recovery. They're expected to recover, but with one leg. The expectation here is that you recover. This is on you, really. It was always kind of a weird feature of local gun accident reporting. And this is an enormous and long article, and it would take us the rest of the day to read through it. So we're not really going to do it. I just wanted you to at least be aware that there was such a story out there, and it tells us stories like this. We'll just give you an example, give you the lead couple paragraphs here. One warm afternoon in May, and we're almost there, May, Dwight Jackson was getting dressed for a visit to his favorite cigar lounge. So naturally, of course, handheld instant death machine has to come, because the cigars don't kill anybody quickly enough. I must bring the instant death machine here in case, well, my fear is that someone else with an instant death machine will walk in and who has a grievance against cigars and will kill us all. So I'm going to bring it. So he slipped his holstered SIG Sauer P320 pistol onto his belt, put on a button-down shirt, and leaned across his bed for his wallet. Suddenly, he said, the gun fired, sending a bullet tearing through his right buttock and into his left ankle. I heard bang, said Jackson, 47, a locomotive engineer who lives in Locust Grove, Georgia. I looked down and saw blood, which is what happens when you shoot yourself. His wife heard the shot from down the hall and screamed. She called an ambulance while Jackson hobbled toward the front door, painting a trail of blood over the hardwood floors. At no point, Jackson later told police, had he touched the gun's trigger. But did anybody believe him? I don't know. The P320 is one of the nation's most popular handguns. A variant of the weapon is the standard issue sidearm for every branch of the U.S. military. Oh boy. Since the gun's introduction to the commercial market in 2014, manufacturer SIG Sauer has, and I don't know, it's weird. SIG is SIG and it's all capitals. SIG, I don't know, that stands for something. And then Sauer is SAUER. You can tell me whether gun enthusiasts say it this way, but at any rate, the company has sold the P320 to hundreds of thousands of civilians, and it has been used by officers at more than 1,000 law enforcement agencies across the nation, court records show. And I wonder if that's the same gun. I have in mind this gun fail story of police officers, a police officer who was sitting at a desk, like at a computer, doing some typing of some kind, and had the gun fire on him and insisted that it was a defective unit. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was also a P320. And I wonder whether he feels vindicated now or whether this is just 80 dummies. I don't know. Anyway, more than 100 people, 100 dummies, allege that their P320 pistols discharged when they did not pull the trigger. An 8-month investigation by the Washington Post and The Trace has found at least 80 people were wounded in the shootings, which date to 2016. So I've probably seen a good number of them. but we didn't always know exactly what kind of gun it was. And also, sometimes there's not much mystery to it. It's like, well, I didn't put my finger on the trigger. It's not fair that I got shot. I didn't accidentally shoot myself by pulling the trigger. And sometimes it's, well, you see, you had the gun in such a way that when you leaned forward, some people have it holstered, some people don't, but something catches on the trigger and, you know, the trigger got pulled. It just wasn't the finger that did it. It's not necessarily that guns just say, you know what? I just feel like firing right now and there's nothing I can do about it. They probably discussed the mechanics of it later on in the story, but, like I said, I haven't read it through yet, but if I make it through the story at some point, and they actually explain the theories of why the things are firing, even though people aren't putting their fingers on the trigger. Maybe we can get back to that. But more to the point, I guess, really about the story, as I'm scrolling, looking, I realize, oh, yes, this is the actual, you know, one of the major points of the story. First section is a bunch of people who swear they didn't do anything wrong, but had holes punched in them by the instant death machines, and because they were holstered, they were pointed down away from the instant death target up top that we all carry with us, and instead they were shot in the lifetime of agony, pain, and struggle portions of their body. And this is an important point here. Exempt from product safety regulations. Let's just sneak this in here before our second break. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, has required recalls of candles whose flames burn too tall, of fleece pajamas shown to cut infants. Well, we don't want that. And classroom chairs with loose welding. But it has never ordered a recall of a gun because it does not have the authority to do so, even if it explodes in someone's hand or spontaneously fires a bullet. These are problems, I think. The omission is the result of an amendment written by Representative John D. Dingell, a Democrat, of course, of Michigan. Unfortunate that he has to be hung around his neck. Written in 1972 when the agency was created by Congress. Dingell, a Democrat from Michigan who also was a gun rights supporter and who sat at the time on the National Rifle Association's board of directors, would later describe efforts to allow the CPSC to regulate firearms as outrageous and harassing the firearms manufacturers. Well, in 1972, you might have thought that. I don't know what he thought later on, but what an unfortunate mess. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, so, well, we only have John Dingell. Well, to blame for this, although I'm sure we could have found somebody else to blame for this. If it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else, but it wasn't. It was him, and once he had created that monster, presumably there was not too much that could be done to undo it because NRA. So that's sad. But as I was scrolling down a little further just to see sort of where does this case go, I thought maybe we should read this section since this has to do with regulatory issues and things that we have to deal with now today. Critics of this stupid idea said that the result of this political deal has endangered gun owners. Now, it endangers everybody, but they don't care about everybody else who it endangers. But it has endangered gun owners, and so therefore you should care about it. You're a gun owner, and you bought your guns to stay safe. What if the guns themselves aren't safe? And, you know, then, of course, you get into the argument, they're very well-trained people. It's not possible that guns make you less safe. Well, what about a defective gun? Oh, yeah. Well, those certainly will admit that those would be unsafe. Well, can we do anything about it? No, you can't, because the Second Amendment guarantees my right to make myself unsafe, I guess. And it's government tyranny to say that products that you sell to people in order to keep themselves safe, which are in fact themselves inherently unsafe, should be regulated out. I don't know. We're just kind of stuck with it. It's one of those catch-22s, except now you're going to catch a 22 because the gun is unsafe. Anyway, wow. These are products that pose a greater safety risk if they malfunction than a bike or a toaster, said Teresa Murray, director of the Consumer Watchdog Office at the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, a consumer advocacy nonprofit. The consumer is paying the price. And sometimes it's actually, though, it's the neighbor of the consumer who is paying the price, or the person sitting next to the consumer in a restaurant who pays the price, or the person who's on the other side of the wall in the hotel room that pays the price. But as I mentioned, gun owners don't care about those people. They do care about themselves, presumably. They just think it won't happen to them. And if it does happen to them, then they want the right to sue anybody. And when it doesn't work, they're going to get angry. And so I guess this is who the article is targeted to. Without federal oversight, gun makers are left to investigate reported defects and inform consumers of potential issues with their products. Guess how often that happens. On multiple occasions, manufacturers have opted to ignore long-standing problems, taking action only when facing pressure from lawsuits or bad publicity. Gun makers Remington Arms and Taurus have both faced class action lawsuits over weapons with alleged defects that have cumulatively injured and killed dozens of people. SIG Sauer has faced claims that the P320 malfunctions since at least 2017, when accounts surfaced that the gun could fire when dropped. Modern weapons can't fire when dropped, we're always told. Someone has shot themselves. I see it in the gun fail. And in the comments to the article, the article notes, I was cleaning a table in order to perform life-saving heart surgery on Cambodian orphans when all of a sudden my gun fell to the floor and shot this innocent person. Don't send me to jail. And then people say, modern guns don't fire when they're dropped. And then sometimes you find out that was grandpa's Derringer. And it's like, well, that's not a modern weapon. But then sometimes you find out it's a SIG Sauer P320 and they say, well, reasons, look away. It's not my problem. It's not my gun. And I have 17 SIG Sauer P320s. But none of them have ever done that to me or to people I care about. They've done it to 16 neighbors, but I hated them. And leave me alone, Second Amendment. Well, anyway, a video from back then in 2017, released in August of 2017, by a Texas gun store, showed the gun firing consistently when dropped at certain angles. Now, you might say, well, what? Well, the impact caused the trigger to depress, the video showed. And yeah, that's another one of the issues with all that. I mean, this is what the gun manufacturers will claim. You say you didn't pull the trigger with your finger, but you pulled it with your jacket pocket or the drawstring of your gym shorts, or a wrinkle of your clothing, or your wallet got caught up in the corner of it, got into the trigger guard, and when you lean forward, it applied pressure. That's usually what happens. That's why I wanted to get into the mechanics of things. Anyway, a day after the video was released, SIG Sauer announced it would modify the pistol's design and launched a voluntary upgrade program in which customers could return their guns to have redesigned components installed. And you know how many people were willing to part with their personal protection weapons for 6 to 8 weeks in order to get that done? Probably about zero. Reporting by CNN later showed SIG Sauer had been notified twice about instances in which the gun fired when dropped, roughly a year before warning the public of the problem, because no one drops their gun in a year. One of those notices was from a little outfit you may have heard of called the U.S. Army. In a response to questions, SIG Sauer wrote that, quote, "It is important to note that the voluntary upgrade program was not prompted by any particular claim and is entirely unrelated to any allegation that the P320 can discharge without a trigger pull or other claims of unintentional discharges." SIG Sauer did not replace the guns sitting on gun store shelves across the country or require retailers to inform customers of the gun's potential risks. If I had known about this gun's problems, it would not have been the gun I carried, said George Abrahams, 55, an Army veteran in Philadelphia, whose P320 sent around, just round, you should go into this man's thigh and you should do it in 2020, because that's apparently when it happened. He had purchased the gun in 2018, so the gun had plenty of time to plot this thing against him, a year after the upgrade program went into effect. But it had not been upgraded, and he was not warned at the gun shop of the firearm's potential issues. Why not? Second Amendment, or something like it. I don't know. The point is, it would have been annoying, and you can't make me, because guns are sacred in this country. So more stories like that then follow. Then the claim that this is an uniquely dangerous model. The P320 is what's known as a striker-fired handgun. With each pull of the trigger, an internal spring-loaded pin, called a striker, rushes forward to detonate a bullet's primer and send a round hurtling out the barrel. But the P320 is different from many striker-fired guns in that it is effectively fully cocked at rest. That's not great. The pull of its trigger does not draw the striker backward in any meaningful distance. It simply releases it. So, it's kind of what you might think of as a hair trigger in that sense, right? It's not like what do they call it? Double action kind of, where a trigger, pulling the trigger, it's a long and tough, hard trigger pull to pull the trigger all the way back, because it has to be responsible for cocking back a hammer or pulling back a striker pin and then releasing it forward as well. But they built this one such that, you'll get your rounds off faster, and I'm sure that's the selling point. It's not as hard to pull the trigger. You won't struggle with it in an emergency, and you can fire faster. And, of course, you could blow your own leg off too, but we're not going to tell you about that. Well, all right, let's see. This illustration in the article shows exactly how this works, and it describes it by saying the striker is kept under constant spring tension by the sear, S-E-A-R, sear. When the trigger is pressed, the sear rotates downward, releasing the striker and firing the gun. The few gun models with similar designs generally mitigate the risk of an unintentional discharge by installing one or more external safeties. You've probably heard about that, which prevent the gun from firing unless they are manually deactivated. Manual thumb safeties, for example, allow the user to toggle between a mode where the trigger can be pulled and a mode where it cannot. That sounds like a good idea. And it sounds like what most gun owners thought semi-automatic handguns had on the regular, but I guess they don't always have it. The military variant of the P320 includes a manual thumb safety. And again, the military version, I guess you're probably more likely to fire your gun under battlefield conditions than under normal walking around conditions. But anyway, I don't know. For some reason, they figured folks in the Army wanted to be safe, and they offered them the safety. The SIG Sauer also offers military-branded versions of the gun for civilians that do incorporate a safety, but all but one civilian-branded model of the P320 have no such safety mechanism. Why would you have a safety mechanism, right? According to a review of available P320 models on SIG Sauer's website. And of course, I guess that makes some certain amount of sense, right? Do you want the safety feature? Well, on my automatic handheld instant death machine, no, I don't want a safety. It's a death machine. I would like it to have no safety features. Reminds me of the Progressive auto insurance commercial with the guy's washing his trash cans or painting his phone number on it. You can never be too careful. With trash? Well, you can never be too careful. With death machines? I mean, you should be careful with death machines, but I want to carry a death machine, and I want to be able to quickly cause other people's deaths if I get afraid that they're going to cause my death. And, there you go. Anyway, civilian models of the P320 have two internal safeties, but neither can be controlled by the user, which doesn't make it sound like a safety at all. The primary internal safety is designed to catch the striker in the case of a malfunction. Guess what? What if the malfunction is with the thing that catches things in case of a malfunction? Anyway, a second mechanism prevents the weapon from discharging when its slide is drawn backward. Okay. The gun's you know what? This may be the time for us to jump out of things. But anyway, suffice to say, they go on to talk about legal wrangling, more other stories of people who have had problems. Here's a section entitled, "They Don't Want It Around Their Family." Why not? Because they're talking about an incident with the SIG Sauer P320, wherein the retelling of the story, and I guess it's illustrated with some video here. Children clogged the cafeteria at Thomas E. Waitman Middle School in Wesley Chapel, Florida, of course, on April 30th, 2019. Grainy security camera footage shows school resource officer Jonathan Cross lifting his weapon, and you'll never guess, yeah, it's a SIG Sauer P320, and resetting it in its holster. As he slides the gun back inside the holster, why is it out of the holster? I don't know. A bullet fires into a wall next to his right foot, leaving a pile of debris. No one was injured, but the incident, coming a day before Florida lawmakers signed a bill permitting teachers to carry handguns, drew national attention and embarrassed Cross's employer, the Pasco County Sheriff's Office. Cross, 49, concedes that he should not have been handling his weapon in a cafeteria full of children. But, he maintains that he didn't pull the gun's trigger. So therefore, there's not a hole in the wall. And I didn't endanger a cafeteria full of children. You did. But why were you handling your weapon? I don't know. I shouldn't have been. But the sheriff's office argued that he mishandled the gun and suspended him the same day. He was later fired, like the gun. "That gun ruined my career," Cross said. I can't believe we're blaming the gun. My God, what's wrong with you? You hate the Constitution, sir? Anyway, 2 other officers at the Pasco County Sheriff's Office survived incidents in which they say their P320s discharged in situations in which nobody pulled the gun's triggers. Both were badly injured by the bullets, which cut through their legs. Both were cleared by their Department of Wrongdoing. The one who didn't hurt himself got fired, I guess. In 2021, Pasco County dropped the P320 as its service weapon. A representative from the sheriff's office said the department moved back to Glock pistols. Sorry, hold on a second. I'll explain why in a second. So that its patrol and tactical units would be using the same weapons. Glock pistols have their own problems, and apparently among the gun enthusiast community, there is a condition known as Glock leg, which, of course, is exactly what it sounds like. A leg injured or destroyed by having been fired through by a Glock pistol, which is not particularly safe in itself, or at least some makes of the Glock pistol. Anyway, some models. Right. Officers are constantly doing personal safety programs at schools for little kids, and when you do that, a lot of them jump up and hang on you, said Bob Northrup, 70, a Tampa Police Department officer whose P320 discharged accidentally, shattering his ankle at a high school baseball game. This is just in the space of these 3 paragraphs. I mean, I know you go out collecting these stories, but how many of these guns are accidentally going off in schools? And I mean, again, that was the purpose of my starting the whole gun fail thing, was after Sandy, after Sandy Hook, and the NRA's response was we should put more guns in the schools. Teachers should carry guns. And the whole point of my collecting the number of gun accidents and the different kinds of gun accidents was to show that if you park a gun in every classroom in America, eventually you're going to start shooting teachers and children accidentally while you're waiting for somebody to show up and shoot them on purpose. And it's statistically just a bad game to play. Don't do it. And now here are these gun enthusiasts and very highly trained people saying, yeah, you really can't do that. It's just, it's not going to work out in the long run. Anyway, so he did it at a high school baseball game. We have the other guy shooting in the cafeteria. There's the other one, the 2 or more cops in Pasco County, who didn't shoot themselves in schools, but, the point is there are plenty of stories of these guns accidentally being fired in schools. It's a whole separate vertical, and dozens of guns lost, fired, what have you, in schools since I began tracking the gun fail in 2013. Anyway, he goes on to say, every time I see kids around the gun, it literally scares the hell out of me, and it should. Anyway, more stories. Let's see if there's any other interesting section heads that, so some discussion of how the manufacturers and plaintiffs fare in court under these weird rules. But again, I recommend to you, when you've got some time, reading the entirety of the article, but we won't spend any more time on it today. All right, let's see. Other things that I think are important to discuss include the following. I picked this up in an email alert from The Hill. Just wanted to add this to the mix so that you're aware of what's going on. Gang of Eight, remember them? The Gang of Eight in intelligence matters are the top leadership, bipartisan leadership of both houses of Congress. You're talking about the majority and minority leadership in the House and the Senate. 8 members there. The Gang of Eight now has access to classified documents found at Trump, Biden, and Pence homes. Those of you following the stories of the classified documents know that following the Pervolago incident, everybody basically said, we better check the homes of all these people and see whether there might be, what about the possibility that some of this was inadvertent? And some of it must have been, because classified documents showed up at Biden and Pence's homes. Was it homes or just offices? I don't know. At any rate, I mean, it might have been the Pence home and the Biden office, but there might have been something in a subsequent search of the Biden home, too. I don't even remember anymore. But, of course, the Biden and Pence instances appear to be different in kind and scope. Did they ever check, like, the Obama home and the George W. Bush home and et cetera, or no? I'm not really sure. Well, anyway, this is sort of an important legal development, and I'll read it to you. The Department of Justice has begun to provide some lawmakers access to the classified documents recovered from the homes of President Biden and former President Trump following a pressure campaign from senators threatening to withhold funding, according to sources familiar with the situation. The documents were provided to the Gang of Eight, comprised of the top 4 leaders in Congress and the head Republican and Democrat from both the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Okay, so you're talking about floor leadership for the House and Senate, both sides, so McConnell and Schumer. Floor leadership for both sides in the House, and so McCarthy and Jeffries, that's our 4. And then Intelligence Committee leadership, both sides from the House, who is, I can't remember who they are, and from the Senate as well. But those are the 4 other people involved. That's the Gang of Eight. All right, and maybe they'll be named in the article. They include, of course, lawmakers have been asking, so what exactly was found at everybody's house? Some people want to know, what was Trump hiding at Pervolago? And Republicans want to know, what was Biden hiding? Something about Hunter, maybe? And so they want to see all the documents. And of course, they're classified, so the Department of Justice and the intelligence community probably not thrilled about the idea of sharing them widely, finally come to the compromise of, the Gang of Eight is supposed to be the people that you they're supposed to be the people you can trust. Now, as it happens, they were leaking during the Trump administration because a lot of the intelligence had to do with Donald Trump himself. And so the Republican leadership on the House Intelligence Committee, in that case, Devin Nunes, right, was just constantly leaking to the White House, leaking to Trump information collected by the intelligence community that would possibly have compromised him, so that he could neutralize it. And that's a danger. But in the ordinary course of things, when the president isn't an active agent of a foreign power and isn't busy committing treason constantly, it's an okay-ish thing to do, because there has to be some accountability, our separation of powers and checks and balances, et cetera, et cetera. There has to be some check against executive control of intelligence information and some oversight performed by the legislative branch of the intelligence community. And so the compromise is, if we share it with the top leadership, who's our best guess is least likely to be either compromised or least likely to be able to get away with obvious compromise by foreign powers or whatever else, then we're covered. I mean, we'll keep it among this gang of 8, and if one or more of them is corrupt, if people are corrupt, there's a problem. What can you do? But there has to be some sharing with the legislative body, and this is how we take care of it. So the documents were provided to the Gang of 8, comprised of the top 4 leaders in Congress and the heads of both the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Got it right. They include a set of documents found at the home of former Vice President Mike Pence as well. So they got access to everything, although we don't know how redacted it was, if at all. The capitulation comes after months of complaints from lawmakers and assurances from both DOJ and the intelligence community, which argued turning over the sensitive documents was complicated by the appointment of 2 special counsels reviewing the matter. Not to mention just the classified nature of the documents. Punchbowl News first reported the development. Senators had been especially vocal in recent weeks about plans to block funding to the Justice Department, i.e. defund the police, over what they viewed as department limitations on their oversight. They're ruining their relationship with the committee that has always been very responsible and a very good working partner with them, said lying sack of crap Senator Marco Rubio, the top Republican on the committee. So Marco Rubio's in the Gang of 8, just to let you know. There's no doubt that there's going to be consequences for it. There has to be. We have to protect our role on oversight. And the way you do that, unfortunately, is to leverage the power that appropriations and authorizations give us. We would prefer not to, but if we have to, we will. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, a member of the Intelligence Committee, but not the head of it, so therefore not on the Gang of 8, said the panel was looking for ways to reach into the executive office of the Justice Department. We have the ability to be able, yes, you have that ability, to be able to fence off certain amounts so that you don't actually receive that until you're actually operating in full faith. That would be good faith, I hope he means. He told The Hill previously. Lawmakers who likewise have access to documents from the Mueller investigation argue that they need to oversee the potential national security fallout from the failure to keep the documents properly stored. That includes weighing if the intelligence community has taken all necessary steps to remedy the damage. The Justice Department on Tuesday declined to comment. Attorney General Merrick Garland, however, late last month said the documents could soon be shared. We believe that there is an accommodation possible. We've been trying to work towards accommodation. We do have to balance the concerns of ongoing criminal investigations, but we also well recognize the oversight responsibilities and obligations of the committee, and we intend to work out an arrangement that will accommodate those interests, he said during an appearance before the Senate Appropriations Committee. Lawmakers have been working to get access to the records since Trump's home was first searched in August. While about 20 records are believed to have been found among Biden's former office and home, there's the answer. In total, authorities recovered some 300 classified records from Mar-a-Lago between various exchanges with Trump and his attorneys. So there you go. Just keeping you up to date on where we stand with A, defund the police, and B, the balance of the need for oversight with the need for keeping the confidential, or rather classified documents under wraps, the DOJ having very recent experience with, let's say, leakage at the Gang of 8. And so, and of course, then there's bad motivations as well, probably including members of the Gang of 8 who are interested in pressing a case against Biden, but ignoring the wrongdoing by Trump, et cetera, or looking for whataboutism evidence that they can use to deflect any guilt in having helped him cover this stuff up. Okay, let's see. A few other things. By the way, today being Wednesday, is the date set for what we hope will be the reinstatement of the second of the two expelled Democratic lawmakers from the Tennessee House. In this case, Justin Pearson, I guess, is awaiting action by the local authorities in his district who are charged with filling the vacancy caused by his expulsion. So the other Justin was restored on Monday, and we expect the same result for Justin Pearson. He has an opinion piece in the New York Times, a guest essay under the title of "I Want to Walk Back into the State House where Republicans voted to expel me." And I would like to see him do that too. And I guess today's the day for that. And so, fingers crossed it all goes well for him. But a much more expansive essay than just, gee, I hope it goes well. And equally eloquent with all of his rhetoric during all of this as well. Two really excellent orators. It was a real mistake to target those guys for a number of reasons, not the least of which their competence. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. There's still a number of things that I kind of want to get to. I guess I recommend reading the piece by Justin Pearson, of course. But it's good rhetoric and just more of the same from him in that sense. And I mean, in the best possible way. Everything you hear from him is eloquent and makes excellent points. Not always, directly on the issue you think is at hand. It's relevant, but he's expansive and tucks some very interesting additional arguments in as well. But hopefully he'll soon be reinstated. But I guess relevant to that situation, I also have another story here, which makes another interesting point about the same situation as well. This one, I guess, from a local Tennessee source, WKRN. Yeah, I think that's Nashville television station. So focusing on this, good point here made by someone completely different, but touching on the subject of the expulsion. The headline reads, "The focus quickly gets distorted." A friend of Dr. Kuntz, that's the director of the school, the Covenant School, who was killed in the mass shooting, a friend of Dr. Kuntz criticizes Tennessee lawmakers, writes Megan Kernan for WKRN, and I have to click all the no thanks. I don't need to be notified of every time the weather changes at WKRN. And here's the point. Friends of Dr. Catherine Kuntz are speaking out about the recent expulsion of state lawmakers. Not just say, well, let's just stick to the issue and leave the politics. No, it's all tied up in one. A close friend and former colleague of the late Covenant school director, late, of course, because she was murdered with a weapon of mass destruction, the assault rifle, used in yet another school mass shooting, about which Tennessee Republicans were hoping to do nothing. But a close friend and former colleague of the late Covenant school director and said the focus has drifted off the tragedy. Maybe that thought that was the point in expelling these two. I feel that in light of the 6 people that died in Nashville, for their only substantive action in the Tennessee State House to be anything around this incident was to kick out 2 legislators. It was absolutely awful, said Jim Lee. And I'm not certain the syntax of that sentence actually hangs together, but the point certainly was, well, people were murdered here, and the only thing the Tennessee legislature could think of to do about it was to kick out people who said we really ought to be doing something. Lee is a former coworker and good friend of the late Dr. Kuntz, and Lee said he's mad, upset, and confused at the actions that were taken at the state capitol last Thursday. This is when you're actually going to do something. You're not going to bring up any type of legislation whatsoever, or at least say, I'm open to talking. Just nothing but silence. But as soon as 3 courageous people pick up a bullhorn, then you did something. And I think that was pathetic, Lee said. Well, I think we all probably agree. What makes him so frustrated is that the state lawmakers chose to respond to gun violence at the Covenant School by expelling 2 Tennessee representatives. It seems like with gun violence, the only thing we can agree on is to do absolutely nothing, which I think is pathetic, Lee said, except we don't actually agree that we should be doing nothing. That's the only thing that happens because one side says we should do nothing. The other side says we should do something. So as a compromise, we do nothing. Well, that's what our system affords us. Okay. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting observation and worth making alongside the recommendation for reading Justin Pearson's inspiring piece in the New York Times. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe I keep saying that it's inspiring and maybe we should just get the inspiration. It's not that long of a piece. Maybe we owe it to him to read through this and, maybe it will send good vibes towards, the appropriate authorities who will be voting. I don't know whether they already did it this morning or do it later today. I don't think the outcome is in doubt, but hey, why not read it? In January, Justin Pearson begins, my former high school classmate, Larry Thorne, was shot dead. Larry was sweet and beloved and a coach and secretary at a Shelby County, Tennessee middle school when he was killed on January 10th. That's this year, just a month before I took my seat in the state house. In February, in only 10 days, 20 people were shot in mass shootings in Memphis, the community I represented, past tense for the moment. And on Monday, 5 people were shot dead at the Old National Bank in Louisville, Kentucky. In the wake of the March 27th Covenant School mass shooting in Nashville that took 6 precious lives, including that of 9-year-olds Haley Haley? I don't know. Oh my goodness. Haley Scruggs, Evelyn Dickhouse, and William Kinney, our people are traumatized. They want action. Following the school massacre, I walked into work in the State House each day, seeing hundreds of young protesters, many with signs that asked, "Am I next?" We were traumatized too. We wanted action too. And the difference was, it was literally our job to act. Yes, Republican legislators refused to take meaningful action. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's true, but it actually says, yet Republican legislators refused to take meaningful action. But yes, that is true, too. Instead, some have averted their eyes and hurried into the chamber, walking through hundreds of mourning protesters to discuss a bill to further expand gun rights by allowing teachers to carry weapons on campus. I don't even know if I would necessarily call that expansion of gun rights. It's just craziness. Anyway, but many of us did not. We stopped and embraced traumatized citizens, traumatized children, parents, and elders. We prayed. We protested. In this season of rebirth and renewal, I stood beside my people with hope. For God said, let light shine out of the darkness. This is the flighty rhetoric that he's so good at, and I keep ruining by reading it incorrectly. Last week, the people of Tennessee and the nation witnessed an assault against democracy when my colleague Justin Jones and I, both young black Democratic men, were expelled from office for allegedly breaching decorum on the House floor. My former colleague, a 60-year-old white female Democratic representative, Gloria Johnson, had also joined our peaceful protest against gun violence, but narrowly survived expulsion. Mr. Jones has since returned to the House after a vote by the Nashville Metropolitan Council. I'm hoping the Shelby County Board of Commissioners similarly puts me back in the House on Wednesday, and that's today, so hopefully they'll do that. There is something amiss in the decorum of the state house when GOP, or GOP as we like to say, GOP leaders like Representative Paul Sherrill, I don't know whether it's Sherrill or Sherrill, who proposed death from, quote, hanging by a tree as an acceptable form of state execution. Mr. Sherrill later apologized for his comment. Feel comfortable berating Mr. Jones and me for our peaceful act of civil disobedience. This, in Tennessee, the birthplace of the Klan, a land stained with the blood of lynchings of my people. I wasn't elected to be pushed to the back of the room and silenced. We who were elected to represent all Tennesseans, black, white, brown, immigrant, female, male, poor, young, transgender, and queer, are routinely silenced when we try to speak on their behalf. Last week, the world was allowed to see it in broad daylight. In such a hostile environment for democracy, I'm inspired by the late civil rights fighter and Congressman John Lewis, who in 1965, when demonstrating for voting rights in Selma, Alabama, endured a police beating that almost took his life. In 2016, after the tragic Pulse nightclub massacre that killed 49 people, he led a sit-in on the U.S. House floor for 25 hours to protest the inaction of lawmakers in the pockets of the National Rifle Association. My mother, a school teacher, and my father, a pastor, instilled in me the hope that justice is possible for all. When I was 15, I attended a Memphis City School Board meeting with my parents to give a speech demanding access to quality textbooks and classes that white peers in their school districts had. These were resources that increased their opportunities for a good college education, chances that black students, too, deserved. A few years ago, I helped lead a coalition of community activists in the fight against the construction of the, Byhalia Connection crude oil pipeline project in my late grandmother's community in southwest Memphis, where, according to a 2013 study, the risk of cancer is 4 times higher than the national average. Both of my grandmothers died from cancer. Our coalition killed the project before it killed more of us. We fought and we won. Unchecked gun violence, environmental racism, and denial of basic health and human services should enrage us all and compel us to action. It's not just our individual voices that were sanctioned and silenced last Thursday. It was the voices of the nearly 135,000 Tennesseans we represented, many who are desperate for protection from the absence of many common-sense gun safety laws in our state. Since the Covenant school shooting, the Republican supermajority in the state House has done little but advance a bill that would allow teachers to carry guns in school, probably SIG Sauer P320s, and propose a $140 million budget increase to pay for the presence of armed guards in public schools, further militarizing them without adequate evidence that this makes schools safer. Besides expanding already expansive gun rights, Republican-led state houses across the country are proposing and passing staggering numbers of bills that serve a fringe, white evangelical agenda that abrogates the rights and freedoms of the rest of us. They're passing legislation to control the intellectual freedom of writers and educators, proposing laws that would restrict the bodily autonomy of transgender children and people who can become pregnant, and curtailing even our right to vote. Combined with a shrinking social safety net as people lose access to resources to meet basic health, housing, and food needs, we have a nation in pain and peril. In a small victory for our people clamoring for change, Governor Bill Lee announced Tuesday that he would sign an executive order strengthening background checks for buying firearms and called for Republican lawmakers to support a red flag law. That would be a big step forward for Tennessee. We learned earlier there are none. I was elected earlier this year by the people of Memphis and Millington to stand up for all of us against encroachments on our freedoms. I will continue to fight with and for our people, whether in or out of office. We and the young protesters are the future of a new Tennessee. Those who seek to silence us will not have the final say. Well done, well written, and we hope that he is returned to the Tennessee House today to continue to take up the fight. There are a couple of other things that I might want to add to the mix here today. And gosh, there's a lot of them. And, well, let's see if we can pick through them and get the most important ones. Here's something, it's always appropriate to share something from Amanda Marcotte, also, as always, writing in Salon, offering, I guess, one at least psychological explanation for the story that Greg was concentrating on Monday when we last visited with him, the plummeting poll numbers for Trump, the inability of the rest of the party to extricate themselves from the situation, their unwillingness to even try. What's driving it all? Well, one possible theory here, captured in this piece, blinded by hate. Republicans too busy to notice plummeting poll numbers for Trump and the GOP. Voters hate Trump, hate GOP abortion politics. They hate the racism, but Republicans keep doubling down. I kept talking about Ron DeSantis, of course, doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. He's doing something slightly different than the rest of the party in all of this. But why are they doing it? Well, here's one theory anyway, and it's only can be a theory. We can never really know. Perhaps it's a sign that they're still traumatized by the 2016 election. Or more likely, it's just that elite members of the pundit class have subconscious anxieties when they see rich people actually held to account for their crimes. That's a possibility. Oops, we've opened up another. I must have accidentally clicked on a link. Or my Sauer P320 did it for me. I'm not certain which. Anyway, but far too much media chatter after Donald Trump finally faced indictments got caught up in a hand-wringing contest over who was most fearful this would somehow help him electorally. Well, score one for common sense over the received wisdom of the punditocracy. A new ABC News Ipsos poll shows Trump's already low favorability ratings have plummeted even further to just 25%. For context, that's 14 points lower than when Trump called the white nationalists who threw a 2017 race riot very fine people. It's 9 points lower than when he incited an insurrection on January 6th, 2021. And of course, it's 4 points lower than earlier in the month as well. Despite the relentless whining about witch hunts from Trump, the polling also shows most Americans are well aware he's a criminal, with 53% saying Trump, quote, intentionally did something wrong. And let's face it, most of the 20% saying he's innocent probably don't believe that. So much as they're just loyal Republicans. But despite the fact that Trump is shaping up to be the loser that a small but outspoken faction of anti-Trump Republicans say he is, so far, it still seems he's got a lock on the Republican presidential nomination during next spring's primary. Indeed, he seems to be growing in popularity with the GOP base, even as his already low approval numbers with the general public plummet further. For many GOP voters, it really is that they would rather lose the 2024 presidential race than admit liberals were right about Trump. But I suspect for many others, it's just that they are in deep denial. Trump and his right-wing media acolytes keep claiming indictments will only make Trump stronger. That is classic wishful thinking, and unsurprising coming from Trump, a man who has coasted his whole life by pretending to be everything he's not, such as a smart businessman or savvy power player. But it's wishful thinking that's infecting the MAGA base. After all, many of them live in a bubble where they don't consume non-MAGA media or interact with normal non-MAGA Americans much, if at all. So it can be easy to convince themselves that the orange-hued fascist is popular nationwide as he is in their Facebook mentions. This level of delusion about their own popularity is not just Trump-centric. There are many signs that Republicans have become an ostrich party. The more the public sees Republicans for who they really are, the less the public likes them. But Trump's narcissism is spreading throughout the party, causing people who really should know better to believe that they have a wellspring of support that simply doesn't exist. The evidence has become overwhelming at this point. And that's an interesting point. I never really thought about that possibility. And one of the key, the key features, I guess, of Trumpism, of the way Trump conducts himself, was he was always ludicrously overconfident in his own greatness and ability. I mean, when he first became popular on Twitter, as I recall, back in like 2012 or so, his shtick then was, people are constantly coming up to me and they're saying, Donald, how are you so great at Twitter? How are you so great at communicating? And I say, I don't know. It just comes to me naturally. What can I tell you? People love me and they love to hear from me. This was the sort of content that he was doing. Donald, how can you tell us how to be so amazingly smart and predict everything the way you do? And I tell them, I don't know. I just have good genes. This was it was a joke. It was like a parody of itself. And I think people thought the jokiness of it was hokey and funny. And I don't know. And then but at some point they came to believe it, or maybe they realized, or maybe they came to this thought, I would say they come to this realization, except that it's not true exactly, but they may have come to the conclusion that Trump is ridiculous about himself, but yet he appears to be sitting on a pile of money. Maybe I too can sit on a pile of money. Maybe the true fact is that if you just walk around like a conceited a-hole and say you're the greatest person ever and just say outrageous things about yourself, regardless of whether you're saying them to people personally or in the press or even in a court of law, nothing seems to catch up with him accountability-wise, and now he's sitting on a pile of money. Maybe we should do the same. Maybe it will work for me. Kind of like that's maybe what DeSantis is all about. Instead of trying to reason away to be kind of sort of like Trump, but don't, run afoul of all the things that we always thought were true about the system, like you can't just blatantly lie, you can't arrest everybody who's against you, whatever. Why not? Maybe you can. Maybe you should be over the top in everything. And maybe that's spread to everybody, where they all say, just lie about stuff. Just say you're the greatest. Just say you're right and the other side is wrong. Just say the other side is the worst possible thing you can come up with. Grooming pedophiles, whatever it is. Satanic child eating, devil worshipping, blood slurping, vampire, whatever. Just say it. What's going to happen? Nothing. Nobody will hold you accountable for it. Just like nobody ever held him accountable for it. And maybe that's all that there is to it. It doesn't say it quite in that way, but I think that's what she's trying to get at. Trump's narcissism is spreading throughout the party, causing people who really should know better to believe that they have a wellspring of support that simply doesn't exist. Not only that they can get away with anything, but they can get away with it because millions of people across the country love it when they do stuff like this. I don't know. They love it when he does it, so why not me? The ego that it takes to be running for office in the first place is probably going to be present in a way that's going to prevent them from saying, well, I'm not him. It's not necessarily going to work for me. It'll definitely work for me. I'm better than he is. That's what the ego says. The evidence has become overwhelming at this point. The anti-abortion views of Republicans are wildly unpopular. Before the Dobbs decision last year, in which the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, it was plausible enough that the public was, quote, divided on abortion. Turns out, however, that was mostly because people didn't actually think they were going to lose access. Now that most Americans see this as a live political issue, instead of a settled right, the backlash has been dramatic. Republicans are losing race after race that they should have or would have otherwise won, but for abortion. Yet Republicans seem unwilling to admit that abortion is a political loser for them. The recent Wisconsin State Supreme Court race is a good example. It's not especially mysterious what happened. Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasewicz beat election denier Dan Kelly by campaigning on the dual promises that she would protect abortion rights and work to restore democracy to the state. Her victory over Kelly would be properly described as an ass-whooping. Not only did she beat him by 11 points at the polls, but voter turnout was unbelievably high for an off-year election for a seat many people probably didn't even previously know was an elected one. In particular, young voters turned out in what looks to be record numbers. But rather than admit that abortion is a losing issue, many Republicans think the problem is that they aren't anti-choice enough. Dominic Pino of the National Review lamented that Kelly hadn't run enough ads highlighting his anti-abortion views, writing, "Conservatives who run away from the abortion issue are destined to lose on it." His attitude is clearly shared by the majority of Republicans in state legislatures who keep drafting ever more draconian abortion bans. Keep banning abortion until morale improves appears to be the guiding philosophy here. The situation in Tennessee last week is starting to look like another example of Republican delusion. Perhaps it's because Trump didn't seem to lose any intra-party support after he had dinner with a couple of Hitler sympathizers late last year. But Tennessee Republicans seem to have no idea that it was a bad look to expel 2 black members of the state legislature simply for speaking out about gun violence in the wake of a mass shooting. The story rocketed to the top of headlines, drawing national attention. Indeed, as Sam Brody of the Daily Beast explained, videos of the expelled members racked up millions of views on social media and a huge amount of money started to pour in. The whole thing helped accelerate a sea change within the Democratic Party of national energy, outrage, and dollars flowing to fierce battles unfolding in state capitals they once neglected. Send that to Atusa Reeser here in Virginia, by the way. In retrospect, Republicans really should have seen the virality of this story coming. And by the way, also Julie Briskman, although that's not a state legislative race, but it's very important that she remain in office. Okay. Got my plugs in there for today. After all, it confirmed the public's worst suspicions about Republicans. They are, to use the vernacular, I guess here, hella racist, hate democracy, and don't care how many people die by gun violence, so long as they keep getting their NRA funding. All the accusations against Republicans that often get dismissed as liberal hyperbole were right there on display in people's faces. It was especially hard for Republicans to run away from the fact that 1 out of 3 representatives whose expulsion came up for a vote out of the 3, only the white person was spared. That was pretty ugly. There's no need to be concerned, however, that Republicans have learned a lesson from any of this, despite what Susan Collins, doubtless, is saying about it. On the contrary, Tennessee Republicans are threatening even more retaliation against voters if those voters continue to insist that they have a right to elect their own leaders. The GOP leadership is reportedly threatening to withdraw education funding from schools in Nashville and Memphis if those cities return the 2 expelled members to the state legislature. You knew that wasn't going to be the end of it, right? If there are any lingering doubts Republicans hate democracy, punishing voters for daring to vote should remove it. Of course, That hatred of democracy is why Republicans are less worried than they should be about their ballooning unpopularity. Republicans are already dependent on gerrymandering and voter suppression to give them power way beyond what they actually earn at the ballot box. They clearly expect, or hope anyway, that they can corrupt the system even further so that voters never have a real say in who their leaders are again. But if this progressive backlash keeps growing, voters may actually have a chance to throw Republicans out before the GOP fires the kill shot on American democracy. Well, okay. It's a theory, and it's a good one, and it's one that's brought us pretty much to the end of today's show. So I've run out of time to include so many other stories that require attention, but as it happens, we'll come back tomorrow. We have another show scheduled. And presumably we'll have Greg, and presumably the Novocaine will have worn off, and he'll be able to talk. Would have been a kind of funny thing to try to bring him on post-dentist. I don't know what he was having done. So anyway, and he made the great old joke. I said to him today when he reminded me this morning that he can't come by because I got the dentist. I said, bring the dentist along. We don't care. It'll be nice to have another voice to chat about things. But of course, Greg says, is not available until 2:30. 2:30. Okay. Man, from one dad joke maker to another, we appreciate that one. It's an old standby. Anyway, speaking of standing by, not that he's particularly old, you don't want to beat up on the poor guy, but Justice Putnam, all right, he's at least as old as I am, if not older. And two old guys who want to bring you the news today on Netroots Radio. Justice Putnam is the next one up, and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is next. And guess what? Hey, Justice, you haven't hit return on the summary of what's going on. I am going to predict, let's see, he's going to be talking about, let's say, voodoo and witchcraft. No, probably not. Anyway, maybe he'll be covering international affairs. Something I wanted to get to today, but maybe we'll save that for Friday. I really do want to check back in on the newfound cooperation and what's going on between Saudish Arabia, and Iran. And finally, our own foreign policy Illuminati are reacting to
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Long story short on that one, I think that our own foreign policy Illuminati have been kind of caught flat-footed on this, and so it appears that their initial reaction is to downplay it. But it seems like it could be a very important development. We have to put it on the radar at some point. Thought that might be today. Figure it will be Friday. Maybe Justice will take care of it next. Stay tuned to find out.